They said, "Seal her in the coffin, nobody will notice." The words cut through the air as if I were already dead, as if my breath, my hands, my memories, the whole weight of my long life were already reduced to silence, to a hushed inconvenience that could be covered with a lid of wood and nails. I heard it so clearly that at first I thought I had dreamed it, perhaps caught between sleep and waking. But no, it was spoken, not even whispered, and it carried with it the cold certainty of people who think they are right, people who think they have authority over another person's very existence. I am 82 years old now, and I live alone in a small apartment that looks onto a backyard where children from the neighboring buildings sometimes shout and chase each other. The sound of their laughter and quarrels is like an echo of the past, a past that for me is filled with both tenderness and cruelty. And yet, what clings most to me is not the sound of games, but the echo of that sentence, the cruel one, the one that declared me invisible, redundant, and already erased. It has followed me like a shadow in my chest. And even though I survived, even though I am here speaking to you with breath still moving through me, I cannot forget how it felt to hear my existence treated as disposable. I was not in a coffin then, though perhaps in their eyes I might as well have been, and I was not yet ready to surrender to that kind of silence. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the faint smell of boiled beets and cabbage lingering from the soup I had cooked for myself earlier that day, the television murmuring from the corner, though I wasn't really listening. And then a voice, one of theirs, hard and casual, saying it. Maybe they thought I did not hear. Maybe they thought the old woman had drifted too far into confusion to understand. But I heard every syllable, and I felt them settle in me like stones at the bottom of a glass. I live alone now, yes, but that was not always the case. Once there were people in this apartment, my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law with her careful shoes clicking on the tiles, voices filling the space so that the walls seemed warmer, but little by little, they found ways to move me to the edges, and then beyond the edges, until I became an absence, a burden, a name to be signed away. I used to think the greatest fear of old age was the weakness of the body, the pain in the joints, the trembling of the hands, the long, slow betrayals of flesh that no longer obeys. But that is not the greatest fear. The greatest fear is invisibility. The moment you realize that the people you raised, the ones whose faces you kissed, whose clothes you mended, whose futures you sacrificed for, now look at you and do not see a person, but an obstacle, a weight to be carried, or better still, disposed of. When I was young, I imagined old women as mysterious keepers of wisdom, people who had seen so much that they could guide others with stories and advice. I did not imagine an old woman being erased, hidden, placed in a coffin while her heart was still stubbornly beating. Yet that is what I faced, and that is why I speak now, because silence would be the same as death. And though my body is slow, though my bones ache when the weather changes, my voice is still mine, and it will not be buried. I think back often to the way they looked at me in those days, the glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching, the documents shuffled and folded, the papers carried in and out as though I had no right to ask what they were, as though my signature, my own hand, was an inconvenience to be replaced with their own forged ones. My name, the name I carried all my life, the name of my father and of my husband, was suddenly a thing they treated as property, to be taken, imitated, falsified, as though it belonged not to me, but to them. And I, sitting there with my cup of tea, with the clock ticking on the wall and the faint ache in my knees, was supposed to simply vanish. Seal her in the coffin. Nobody will notice. But I noticed. I was alive inside that coffin they built with their words, and I knocked. Not with my fists at first, but with my memory, with my stubborn refusal to be erased. When I speak now, when I open my mouth and tell this, it is that knocking you hear, the knocking of a woman still inside her body, demanding to be let out, demanding to be heard. I am 82, yes, and my days are quieter than they once were. But do not think that quiet means absence. The silence I keep is not submission, but preparation, the gathering of strength for each word I now place before you, like a stone laid in a path. They thought no one would notice. But you notice, because I am telling you, because my voice fills the space between us now, because my story is still unfolding, not yet sealed, not yet finished. I can remember the moment so clearly, every small detail. I can still feel the chill of the airport's artificial air, the sound of shoes tapping against the smooth floor, the hum of distant voices, the announcements that echoed over the loudspeakers. It was a moment that should have been full of excitement, anticipation, the air thick with the weight of a family vacation, a trip to Hawaii, no less. I had packed my bags days before, laid out my clothes with the same care I used to when Adam was small, when I'd prepare his school outfits, making sure he was always presentable, always ready for whatever came next. I was used to being needed, to being part of the action, to playing my role in their lives. But this time, as I sat there in the waiting area, I felt as though I had been set aside, like an old photograph no one bothered to look at anymore. They told me to wait. Just stay here, Mom. We'll take care of everything. I didn't question it. I sat where they told me, next to a potted plant that had long since lost its vibrancy, between a crying child who had been tired of waiting since the moment they arrived, and a television flickering with weather reports that made no sense. I watched the families passing by, the young parents bustling around with their children, their lives full of motion, full of purpose. And there I sat, still as a statue, watching as the minutes dragged by. I could feel the strange tension in the air, the kind you can't quite name, but know exists. I knew something wasn't right. Adam had been quieter than usual, his eyes not meeting mine. Lisa, my daughter-in-law, had that tight smile on her face, the one she always wore when she didn't want me to notice something. She had always been a little too careful around me, and I never quite understood why. But I never pressed her. She was family, after all. Still, something felt off. There were no soft, affectionate words, no gestures of kindness, no laughter, no warmth, just a sense that something was being kept from me, that I had been placed in a waiting room, and that was where I would stay. And so I did. I waited. The hours stretched on, long and monotonous, and I kept thinking that any moment Adam would appear, or Lisa would call my name, and they'd apologize for making me wait. But no one came. I began to feel the slow, creeping realization that this wasn't just an oversight, that I wasn't just forgotten. No, it was deliberate. I didn't want to believe it, but the facts were undeniable. The minutes turned into hours, and still, no one came for me. I waited. After 2 hours, I stood up and paced by the window, trying to catch a glimpse of them in the crowd. I tried not to panic, tried not to let my mind go to dark places. They had to have gotten caught up in something, right? The children, the bags, the boarding passes. There were always so many details to manage. But the minutes kept passing, and then the hours. My feet grew tired, and my heart began to pound. But I couldn't move. I couldn't leave. And then the moment came. The moment that confirmed what I had already known deep down. I approached the desk, my heart in my throat. I asked about Adam's flight, asked about the boarding, and the clerk, a young woman with an overly polite smile, typed in the information. She glanced at me, then hesitated. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, almost too kind. She repeated the information to me, slowly, carefully, as though she were speaking to someone who didn't understand, someone who needed reassurance. They checked into the 1:45 flight to Honolulu. "Ma'am, it's already departed." The words were like a slap to the face. I felt my breath catch, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond. I asked her to repeat it, hoping that maybe it was some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding. But no, it was true. They had boarded without me. They had left me behind, and they had done it on purpose. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't let out the fury that was building up inside me. I just stood there, in the middle of the airport, feeling like the floor had been yanked out from under me. I wasn't angry, at least not in the way I thought I'd be. I was numb. I was hollow. I had been abandoned, not by accident, but by choice. I turned and walked into the restroom, locking myself in a stall. I didn't cry because there were no tears left. I didn't know what to feel anymore. There was no more rage, no more confusion, no more disbelief. It was just emptiness, a deep, aching hollowness that seemed to stretch all the way to the core of me. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but eventually I had to leave. I had to face what had been done. When I emerged, the airport was changing. The light was different, softer, and the crowds had thinned out. It was late afternoon now, and the usual bustle of a busy terminal had quieted down. I stood there for a moment, feeling out of place, not sure what to do with myself. I was still in my clothes from the morning, my vacation Nana shirt, the one Lisa had insisted I wear, the one I hated. I hated the way it made me feel, as though I were just a prop in their family's picture, a bright-colored accessory that could be discarded when the vacation was over. I thought about going back to the lounge, sitting there and waiting for them to return, but I knew they wouldn't. They had made their choice. They had left without me. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of their absence pressing down on me. And so, I did the only thing I could think to do. I bought a ticket to Portland. I didn't know why I chose Portland, but it felt like the furthest place from Hawaii, from the family I had once belonged to, from the people who had abandoned me without a second thought. It was the only place I could think of where I could be alone, where I could think, where I could start to unravel this new reality they had forced me into. I didn't have much money left, but I had enough for a one-way ticket, a cheap motel, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to breathe again. I didn't look back as I walked to the gate. I didn't look back because I knew if I did, I might never find the courage to leave. This was my decision now. This was my flight. Theirs had already taken off without me. I didn't have any plans when I boarded the plane to Portland. I didn't even know where I would stay when I arrived, but I knew I had to leave. I had to get out of the place that had been my life for so many years, the place where I was no longer welcomed, no longer seen, no longer needed in the way I had once been. It wasn't so much a matter of distance, of the literal miles between me and the place I'd left behind, but rather of the space I needed to reclaim inside myself. I didn't know exactly what I was running from or what I was running toward, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had the right to choose for myself, to move in a direction that wasn't dictated by anyone else. I wanted nothing more than to be as far from their lies, their manipulations, their well-meaning but suffocating demands as possible. And so I sat on that plane, watching the city lights fade beneath me, and I felt a kind of quiet resolve settling over me. The lights of the city, the lights of my old life, receded into the distance, and I let them go. When I landed in Portland, I didn't feel the usual disorientation that comes with arriving somewhere unfamiliar. Maybe it was because I had known this city once, long ago, when I was young and hopeful. Or maybe it was because there was nothing left for me where I had come from. I didn't need to be told what to do anymore, didn't need someone to hold my hand and tell me where I was supposed to be. I could simply walk. I could simply breathe and choose my next step without asking for permission. The air in Portland felt sharp, almost cleansing. The kind of air that reminds you of the world outside your own narrow experience. It was a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't realized how much I had allowed myself to be confined until I stepped off that plane and felt my chest open, just a little. I didn't have any grand plans. I didn't need to. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. So, I found a cheap motel and checked in, still unsure of exactly what I was doing or where this would all lead. The room was small, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. I unpacked my few belongings, taking out only what I needed, and placed them carefully around the room. I didn't need much. The sheets on the bed were stiff, but they smelled clean. The walls were thin, but they provided a kind of quiet space I hadn't had in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was alone, truly alone, without the weight of anyone else's expectations, without the silent judgment that had followed me for years. It wasn't the freedom I had imagined, but it was enough. It was a beginning. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had anywhere to be, but because I felt the need to move, to do something. I made my way to the small cafe down the street, the one I had passed the night before on my walk. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods was inviting, and I couldn't resist. I ordered a simple coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by. The world was moving around me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just watching it happen to other people. I felt a part of it, if only in the smallest way. I didn't have any expectations for the day, but as I sat there with my coffee, I began to wonder if I could stay here, if I could build something from this quiet, unremarkable life that didn't demand anything from me except to exist. Maybe this could be enough. Maybe I didn't need to go back. I thought about my family, about Adam and Lisa, and I felt the familiar pang of loss, of being unwanted, of being an afterthought in their lives. But I also felt something else, something stronger. A kind of anger, yes, but more than that, a kind of strength. They thought they could get rid of me, but here I was, still standing, still making choices for myself. Here I was, living in a world where no one told me when to speak or when to stay silent. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without feeling guilty about it. but life doesn't always let you rest for long. It wasn't long before I started to feel the familiar tug of my old life, the pull of responsibilities, of people who still thought they could control me even from afar. I knew that I would have to make decisions, and quickly. I couldn't stay in a motel forever. I needed a place of my own, a home that didn't belong to anyone else. And so, I began looking. I walked through the neighborhoods, slowly at first, unsure of what I was looking for. But something in me told me I would know it when I found it. It wasn't long before I stumbled across a small room for rent in a quiet house owned by a woman named Joyce. Her house was nothing special, old and lived in, with mismatched furniture and faded curtains. But it felt like a place I could belong. I hesitated at first, unsure of whether this was the right move. But something in Joyce's no-nonsense demeanor made me feel like this was my best shot. She didn't offer any grand promises, didn't try to make me feel welcome with empty words. She just handed me a key, took my rent, and told me the rules. There was no fluff, no pretense. It was exactly what I needed. The simplicity of it, the straightforwardness, was exactly what I had been missing. Joyce wasn't looking for a guest. She was looking for a tenant. And I, for once, wasn't looking for approval. I was looking for a place to put down roots, to build something that was entirely mine, something that no one could take away from me. I moved in quickly, carrying only the things I needed, leaving behind the excess, the things I had clung to out of habit. The old photographs, the keepsakes, the things that used to hold meaning for me. They stayed behind. I didn't need them anymore. I had enough of my own strength to stand on my own, to carve out a space for myself. Joyce was gruff, but she was kind in her own way, and she didn't ask questions. She just let me be. And that was enough for me. I found a job at a small cafe down the street, not because I needed the money, but because it gave me a sense of purpose, something to do with my time. It was strange at first, being in a place where no one knew me, where I wasn't someone's mother or grandmother or wife. I was just another person in the world, just another woman trying to make her way. And that was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. It was a small thing, a shift in the rhythm of my days, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. But even in this new life, the past had a way of catching up with me. The phone rang one afternoon, and I knew without looking that it was Adam. I let it ring, and then I turned off the phone. The next morning, I found a letter waiting for me from my grandson, Kieran, the only one who had ever shown real affection without ulterior motives, the only one who still saw me as more than just a relic of the past. The letter was short, a few simple lines asking if I was okay, telling me that Adam and Lisa were worried, but that Kieran missed me and hoped I was safe. His handwriting was messy, youthful, and I felt a flicker of something soft in my chest. But even as I read the words, I knew something had changed. The past was still trying to pull me back, but I wasn't going to let it. Not this time. Not anymore. There is a moment in every person's life when things shift, when the ground beneath you feels as though it's slipping away, and yet you find yourself standing taller, your feet sinking into the soil, more rooted than before. It's not something you can plan for, and it's certainly not something you can anticipate. It's just there, sudden and unexpected, like a wave that rises behind you, not because you see it coming, but because it has always been there, waiting for the right moment to crash over you. That moment came for me while I was working at the cafe. Not one of the special moments people dream of, not a dramatic revelation, but rather something quiet, something simple. It was the steady rhythm of my life, a life I was still figuring out but had already begun to claim for myself. I had settled into my new routine. The days were filled with the small comfort of mundane tasks. The smell of fresh coffee grounds in the morning, the soft hum of the cafe's jukebox playing in the background, the steady rhythm of the espresso machine hissing and grinding. It was simple, yes, but there was something about it that made me feel like I mattered again. I wasn't just an old woman sitting on the sidelines. I was a part of the world again, not a passive observer, but an active participant. It was the first time in years that I had felt this alive, this connected. No longer was I the subject of hushed conversations. No longer was I someone who could be easily discarded, abandoned in silence. I had a voice again. It wasn't loud, it wasn't powerful, but it was mine. It was a week into my new life when the phone call came. I had been expecting it, of course. It was inevitable. I had been avoiding them, avoiding Adam's calls, avoiding the relentless, repetitive voicemails Lisa had left. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear them tell me how sorry they were, how they had made a mistake, how they needed me. I didn't want to listen to their excuses, to their justifications. I didn't want to be told that everything had been a misunderstanding, that I had misinterpreted their actions. I had spent so many years trying to understand their silence, trying to fit their behavior into a narrative that made sense, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend that the hurt wasn't real, that the abandonment wasn't intentional, that they hadn't made a choice that left me behind. But the phone rang, and for the first time, I didn't ignore it. Something in me told me to pick up, to answer, to face what was coming. It was Adam's voice, deep and soft, tinged with that familiar hesitation I had come to recognize over the years. He was asking how I was, if I was okay, if I was happy in Portland. His words were slow, cautious, like he was walking on eggshells, unsure of how I would respond. I didn't answer him right away. I just listened, hearing the faint crackle of his voice over the line, the tension that hung in the space between us. It was strange, how familiar it all felt, and yet how distant. It was as if we were strangers, as if the years of love and frustration that had bound us together had suddenly become a memory, something that belonged to another time. And in that moment, I realized that I had become a stranger to him too. No longer was I the mother he came to for advice, the one who had always been there for him, ready to lend a hand or an ear. No, now I was just a voice on the other end of the phone, a voice he had to reach out to carefully, tentatively, unsure of how to approach me, unsure of how to fix what had been broken. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't know how to respond to his hesitation, to the words that seemed so empty, so insincere. I could hear the guilt in his voice, the shame, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, to undo the years of neglect, of silence. And so, I let the silence stretch between us, letting it hang there like a weight that neither of us could move. Eventually, I spoke. Not with anger, but with a calmness I hadn't known I had. I told him that I was fine, that I was okay, that I was building a life for myself. It was the truth, but it was also a lie. I was fine in the sense that I was surviving, that I was no longer trapped in the life I had once known. But I wasn't okay in the way he expected. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was taking care of everything, when I was always there for them, always available, always ready to be needed. That person was gone, and I couldn't go back to being her, not now, not ever. Adam didn't know how to respond to that. He stumbled over his words, trying to explain himself, trying to make it right, but nothing he said could change what had happened. I could hear it in his voice, the regret, the desperation, the realization that he had lost me in a way he didn't fully understand. And for a moment, I felt a small flicker of something. Anger, sadness, disappointment, all tangled together in a knot inside me. But that flicker didn't last long. I had already made my choice. I had already begun the process of moving on, of letting go. The truth was that I didn't need him anymore, not in the way he thought I did. I didn't need his approval, his love, his validation. I had already found my own strength, my own voice, and I wasn't going to hand it back to him, to anyone. Not now, not ever. The conversation didn't last long. After a few minutes of awkward silence, I told him that I had to go. I didn't hang up abruptly, didn't slam the phone down, but I ended the conversation with a finality that left no room for further discussion. There was nothing more to say. Nothing that could undo what had been done. I had already made peace with the fact that I wasn't part of their life anymore. I had already made peace with the idea that the person I had been, the mother and grandmother who had once held everything together, was gone. She was never coming back, and that was okay. When I hung up the phone, I felt strangely calm, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel defeated either. I felt like I had taken control of my own narrative, like I had stepped into a new chapter of my life, one where I was no longer defined by the past, no longer defined by the role I had played in their lives. I wasn't their mother, their grandmother, their burden anymore. I was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It's strange, isn't it? How the past, no matter how far you run from it, always finds a way to catch up with you. I had thought that by leaving, by putting miles between myself and the life I had known for so many years, I could finally be free. I had settled into my new routine in Portland. I had a job, a small apartment that was mine, a simple life that didn't require anyone else's approval. I was getting used to the idea of living alone, of making decisions that were mine, and mine alone. There were days when I felt that kind of quiet joy, that subtle satisfaction of being able to wake up in the morning without the weight of other people's expectations on my shoulders. I thought that was enough, that I could be content with my own company, with the small things that made life feel less ordinary, the warmth of a cup of tea in the morning, the sound of my footsteps on the pavement as I walked to work, the kindness of the people who had begun to know me as more than just the old woman who had been abandoned by her family. I was wrong, of course. The past doesn't let go so easily. I learned that one day when I came home from work to find a letter waiting for me on the doorstep. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Perhaps it was a letter meant for someone else, a stray envelope that had found its way to my door by accident. But when I saw the return address, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was from Adam, my son, the same son who had left me behind at the airport, the same son who had taken my presence in his life for granted until there was nothing left for him to take. I stood there for a moment, the envelope in my hands, staring at the handwriting on the front, the familiar scrawl of his name, the letters I had known since he was a child, since he had written his first shaky words in crayon on a piece of construction paper. I didn't open it right away. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend that it had never come, to keep the small but growing peace I had found in my new life intact. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the warmth of his embrace when he was young, the part that still hoped for something more from him, that part of me reached for the letter. I opened it slowly, carefully, almost as if I were handling something fragile, as if the words inside could break me in a way I wasn't prepared for. The letter was short, too short for the years of silence, the years of abandonment. Adam apologized. He apologized for everything, for leaving me at the airport, for the silence that had followed, for the years of neglect that had led us to this point. He said he had made a mistake. He said he wanted to make it right. He told me that he missed me, that he was sorry for everything that had happened. He said he wanted to reconnect, that he didn't want me to feel like I was alone anymore. He promised that he would come to Portland to see me. That was the final line, the one that made my heart skip a beat. I will come to see you soon. I want to make things right. I read those words over and over again, the familiar script on the page, and each time I read it, I felt something tighten in my chest. Was this real? Was this genuine? Or was it just another attempt to cover up the damage, to make it all disappear with words that meant nothing? How could I believe him? How could I trust him after everything he had done? After all the years of silence, after the way he had left me behind without a second thought, how could I ever think that he could make it right? I couldn't. And yet, a part of me wanted to believe it. A part of me wanted to believe that the son I had raised, the one who had once clung to me for comfort and guidance, could find his way back, that he could see me as more than just a burden, more than just the old woman who had outlived her. Usefulness. The problem, of course, was that I didn't know what to do with all of this. I didn't know how to move forward when I didn't even know if I wanted him back in my life. I didn't know if I could forgive him for what he had done. I didn't know if I could even forgive myself for wanting him back, for longing for the connection that had been severed so carelessly, so completely. That night, I barely slept. I turned the letter over in my hands, stared at the words, but they didn't offer me any answers. I wanted to scream, to throw the letter away, to erase the past and pretend it had never happened. But I couldn't. The truth was that I was still his mother. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how many miles separated us, I was still the one who had given him life, the one who had loved him without question, without reservation. And that love, that deep, unshakable bond, was still there, even after everything. The next morning, I went to work as usual, though my mind wasn't on the coffee I was preparing or the customers I was serving. It was on the letter, on the promise Adam had made. I kept running the words over and over again in my head, trying to figure out what to do next. What did I want? What did I need? Was I strong enough to face him again, to open myself up to the possibility of being hurt all over again? Or was I better off keeping my distance, protecting myself from the one person who had caused me the most pain? It wasn't until later that day that the second letter arrived. This one was from Lisa. It was longer than Adam's, and its tone was different. There was no apology, no mention of what had happened at the airport, no attempt to take responsibility. Instead, it was a message of guilt, a message of blame. She told me that Adam had been devastated by what had happened, that he couldn't understand why I had left without a word, why I had chosen to disappear from their lives. She told me that they had been worried about me, that they had been trying to reach out, but I hadn't responded. She asked why I was doing this to them, why I had made it so difficult for them to help me. And that was when I realized the truth. Adam's letter had been an attempt to soften the blow, to make things seem like they could be fixed, like we could go back to the way things had been. But Lisa's letter, her words of guilt and manipulation, made it clear that they didn't understand. They didn't get it. They didn't understand the pain they had caused, the years of neglect and silence, the years of treating me like I was nothing more than a convenience. They didn't understand that this wasn't about me running away. This was about me finally standing up for myself, finally saying enough was enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letters in front of me, and for the first time since I had left, I realized something. I realized that I wasn't the one who had to fix this. I wasn't the one who had to make things right. They were the ones who had to do the work. They were the ones who had to understand that I was no longer the person I had been. They were the ones who had to learn how to meet me where I was now, not where they wanted me to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let them rewrite this story, make it into something it wasn't. I was standing firm, standing in the life I had built for myself. If they wanted to be a part of it, they would have to meet me on my terms. They would have to earn that place because I wasn't going to give it to them so easily anymore. I had been waiting for something to happen, some moment that would push me past the threshold of uncertainty, some final sign that would tell me what I was supposed to do next. I had thought I would feel a sudden clarity, like a light bulb flicking on, illuminating everything that had been in shadow before. But life doesn't work that way, does it? The decisions we make aren't handed to us neatly, wrapped in a bow with the answers already written out. No, the most important choices are messy, tangled up in fear and hope, in doubt and strength, in the desire to move forward and the overwhelming pull to stay behind. The thing is, once you've reached a certain point, once you've crossed a line you can never go back from, the decision doesn't really feel like a decision anymore. It's simply the next step in the path that's been laid out before you. The path that you've already walked so far that to turn back would mean losing everything you've worked for, everything you've come to realize about yourself. I had crossed that line. It had happened the night I decided to stop hiding, to stop pretending that I was anything other than the woman I had become. The woman who had fought to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. The woman who had fought to stop being silenced by guilt, by manipulation, by the expectations of others. It was strange how long I had let myself believe that my worth was tied to their approval, to their love, to their recognition. How many years had I spent in that suffocating place, trying to fit myself into their mold, trying to bend to their demands, trying to be what they wanted me to be? I had been a mother, a grandmother, a wife, but somewhere along the way I had forgotten how to be just me. I had been so lost in their needs, in their desires, that I had let my own needs slip into the background, until I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I didn't even know who I was, outside of the roles they had assigned to me. But now, in this quiet moment, I realized that I had been wrong. I had spent so many years believing that their love for me was the only love that mattered, that their approval was the only thing that could give my life meaning. And I had sacrificed so much for that love. I had given up pieces of myself, small bits at first, and then larger ones, until I was barely recognizable to myself. But now, I had taken those pieces back. I had reclaimed my voice, my identity, my power, and nothing, no one, could take that from me. The realization didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic moment, some grand revelation that left me breathless and trembling. It was more like the slow, steady unfurling of a flower, the gradual opening of a door that had been locked for so long. I didn't need anyone else to tell me that I mattered. I didn't need their validation, their apologies, or their promises. I had already found my worth, and it was enough. It had been there all along, buried beneath the years of silence, of neglect, of betrayal. But it was mine now, and that was all that mattered. The phone call came the next day, as I knew it would. This time it wasn't Adam, and it wasn't Lisa. It was Kieran, my grandson, the only one who had truly seen me for who I was. He had been the light in the darkness, the one who had never treated me like an afterthought, the one who had never made me feel invisible. I had never been able to protect him from the things I couldn't protect myself from, but in that moment, I realized that he was the one I had been fighting for all along. It was him I had been trying to save, not just from the world, but from the way the world had tried to erase me, to erase him. The world had its way of diminishing people like me, people who had outlived their usefulness in the eyes of those who had forgotten what it meant to love unconditionally. But Kieran hadn't forgotten. When I picked up the phone, I could hear the urgency in his voice. He told me that Adam and Lisa had been calling him, telling him that they were coming to Portland to see me, to make things right. They wanted to fix everything, to apologize, to take back the years they had wasted. But as he spoke, I felt the familiar weight of something shift inside me. I didn't know if I was ready for this, if I was ready to see them again, to open the door to the past that I had been so determined to leave behind. But as Kieran spoke, something inside me told me that this wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about their mistakes or their apologies. It was about me. I sat down on the couch, the phone pressed to my ear, and I listened to Kieran's words. He wasn't asking me to forgive them. He wasn't asking me to forget what they had done. He was simply telling me that they wanted to try, that they wanted to make it right, that they were coming for me. But I knew in that moment that I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me, to make things right. I wasn't going to put my life on hold, waiting for a resolution that might never come. I had already taken control of my own story, and it was time for me to decide what happened next. I told Kieran I would meet him. I told him I was ready, not because I needed them to apologize, but because I needed to see them for who they were now, to understand what they had become, to understand what had happened to us. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. The past had its grip on me, yes, but I wasn't going to let it hold me hostage any longer. It was time for the final reckoning, for the moment where I would stand tall and face the people who had left me behind, who had forgotten what it meant to love, and show them that I was no longer the woman they thought they knew. When they arrived, I didn't feel the anger I had expected. I didn't feel the need to punish them, to make them feel the same hurt they had caused me. I didn't even feel the guilt that had once eaten away at me, the guilt of leaving, the guilt of choosing myself. No, I felt something else. I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had survived, that I had made it to this point, and that nothing, no apology, no excuse could take that from me. They were different, of course. They looked older, weary in a way that made them seem smaller than they had before. Adam's eyes were tired, but they held a sincerity I hadn't seen in years. Lisa looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected, as if the years of tension between us had worn down the walls that had once kept her from seeing me clearly. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need them to fix anything. I didn't need them to say anything. They had already made their choices, and so had I. But as I looked at them, I saw the cracks in their armor, the pain in their eyes, and I understood something I hadn't been able to grasp before. They were just as lost as I had been, just as broken, just as much a product of the world that had taught us all to hide our true selves behind facades of politeness and pride. We sat there in silence for a long time, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence that held no expectations, no demands. It was a silence that was full of understanding, full of acceptance, full of the knowledge that we had all made mistakes, and that was okay. We didn't need to fix everything. We just needed to be. The days after they left were quieter, softer in a way I hadn't expected. I had braced myself for some dramatic shift, for a final burst of emotion, or a crushing sense of finality. But instead, it was as if something inside me had settled, like a storm that had passed, leaving only the stillness in its wake. I had expected myself to feel lighter, to feel the weight of their presence lifted from my shoulders. But instead, I found that the real freedom came from a deeper place, one I hadn't even realized was there. It wasn't the absence of their voices, their expectations, their need for me. It wasn't the fact that they had left or the fact that I had chosen to step away from them. It was something more subtle, something that had been building inside me for a long time without me even noticing. It was the understanding that I no longer needed to carry their burden, that I didn't need their approval to live my life. For so many years, I had held on to the belief that my worth was tied to their love, that I needed them to see me, to acknowledge me, to forgive me for the parts of myself I had given away in the hopes of being accepted, of being needed. But in the end, I had discovered something far more profound, that I was enough on my own. I had spent so much time looking for validation in others that I had never truly learned how to validate myself. I had waited for them to give me permission to live, to give me permission to be free. But the truth was, I had always had the power to give myself that permission. The freedom came not in waiting for them to change or apologize, but in realizing that I didn't need them to define who I was. I had already defined myself. The weeks that followed were a blur, filled with the small, quiet moments of everyday life. I woke up each morning with a sense of peace, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. The pain of the past was still there, still present in my memories, but it no longer had the power to control me. It was just a part of the story, a chapter that I had lived through, but not one that I needed to keep living in. I started to embrace the simple pleasures of life again, the things I had once enjoyed before I had become so consumed by the need to be needed. I took long walks in the park, watched the birds flit about in the trees, and spent quiet evenings reading books I had forgotten I loved. It was a kind of slow healing, one that didn't require any grand gestures, just the steady rhythm of daily life. In those moments, I realized that I had been so caught up in the noise of the world, in the expectations of others, that I had forgotten how to just be, how to just exist. And that, too, was enough. But even as I found peace in the silence, there were moments when I couldn't help but think of them, of Adam, of Lisa, of the life I had once shared with them. I thought of the laughter we had shared, the moments of tenderness, the times when I had believed, perhaps naively, that we would always be there for each other. And I wondered, in those moments, if they would ever understand the depth of what had happened, if they would ever truly grasp the consequences of their actions. But those thoughts were fleeting, just brief flashes that passed through my mind without staying for long. I had learned to let go, to release the need for closure, for answers that may never come. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need them to see me for who I was. I had already seen myself. One day, as I sat at the cafe, sipping my coffee and watching the people pass by, I received a letter. This one was different from the others. It wasn't from Adam or Lisa. It wasn't from anyone I knew. It was from the woman who had rented me the small room when I first moved to Portland, the one who had welcomed me without asking questions, without expecting anything in return. The letter was short, just a simple note, but it felt like a gift. She had noticed that I had started to come out of my shell, that I had begun to smile more, to laugh more, and she wanted to tell me how proud she was of me. It wasn't much, just a few kind words, but in that moment, I realized something that I hadn't fully understood until then. This was the kind of love I had been waiting for all along. Not the love that came with conditions, not the love that expected something in return, but the love that accepted me as I was. The love that saw me for who I truly was, not for the roles I had played. It was the kind of love that didn't ask for anything, but simply acknowledged my existence. And in that moment, I understood that I had been searching for the wrong kind of love all these years. I had been waiting for the love that would fill the emptiness inside me, the love that would make me feel whole again. But the truth was, the only love that could do that was the love I gave myself. The love that I had always had, deep down inside. The love that had never really gone away, even when I had forgotten how to find it. I still thought about Adam and Lisa from time to time, of course. I still wondered if they had ever truly understood what they had done, if they had ever truly seen the hurt they had caused. But those thoughts no longer controlled me. I didn't need their approval or their apology. I didn't need them to change or make things right. I had already made things right for myself. I had already found peace. And in that peace, I found the strength to let go, to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. I had spent so many years holding on to the past, holding on to the pain, holding on to the hope that things would change. But in the end, I realized that the only thing I had to change was my own perspective. I had to let go of the story I had been telling myself, the story of being the victim, the story of being abandoned, the story of being lost. I had to write a new story, one where I was the hero, one where I was in control, one where I was enough just as I was. And so, I let go. I let go of the hurt, the anger, the disappointment. I let go of the need to be loved by anyone other than myself. And in that letting go, I found a freedom that I hadn't known I was searching for. I didn't need anyone else to complete me, to define me, to give my life meaning. I had already done that for myself, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.